1998 was both a tremendously sad and incredibly exciting time in the life of the Sega Saturn. On one hand, the Saturn in the US was in a complete freefall and set to be abandoned by Sega of America. There were only a handful of releases left and then its retail life would be over. Japan, however, was still seeing some major releases and had just a bit of life left in it. That year we saw some great stuff like Wipeout XL, The King of Fighters 97, Dragon Force 2, Gun Griffin 2, Super Tempo, Dracula X Nocturne in the Moonlight, Pocket Fighter, Deep Fear, Radiant Silvergun, Astra Superstars, Capcom Generation Collection, Cotton Boomerang, and Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter. The writing was on the wall even in Japan, but at least we still had more to see on a console that was not yet 4 years old at this point. Among those releases in 1998 was a Capcom fighter I had been very much looking forward to. Back in 1996, we had received Night Warriors Darkstalkers Revenge on the Saturn, a sequel to the 1994 arcade hit Darkstalkers. I really enjoyed this because it played just like Street Fighter II, though it had a darker theme that included many creatures of mythical lore. The Saturn had done a very decent port of it, looking and sounding nearly as good as the arcade on which it was based. That made its sequel in 1998 top on my lists of things to get. Vampire Savior, the Lord of Vampire, was that game, and it supported the 4MB RAM expansion cartridge for what promised to be one heck of a conversion. In this episode, we will be taking a look at that, see how it fared, and talk about its merits today. I hope you enjoy my review of Vampire Savior, the Lord of Vampire. The story here is simple. A reborn demon named Jada has created a new world, and he intends to feed the souls of the Darkstalkers to it. Only then will this new life form be sustained. As you can imagine, our cast of misfits don't take kindly to this development, and so the showdown begins. As I mentioned before, this series was so easy to get into because it felt so similar to Street Fighter. You had the same 6-button input of 3 punches and 3 kicks. You had very similar special moves that could be done with various directional pad inputs. There was a specials meter that would build up as you played and once full, gave you access to super moves. The first was called ES moves, which were enhanced specials of your existing arsenal. For example, if your character had a projectile attack, the ES version is activated by pressing 2 of the same buttons instead of 1, and would consume some of your special meter for a more potent version. It would typically hit more times and result in higher damage. You also had EX moves, which were more akin to Street Fighter super combos, both in execution and result. These were often quite different from your normal specials, and would hit many more times should you connect properly. There was also a new Dark Force summons that would temporarily magnify your damage and hit potential while putting your foe at a disadvantage. Sometimes it was something as simple as mirroring your attacks, and sometimes it would give you additional reach and even make you virtually invincible. These attacks were easily activated by hitting 1 punch and 1 kick together of the same power. Though the name of this one is simply Vampire Savior, it's actually a hybrid of the various arcade revisions of that game. Because of this, it includes the full mainline cast of fighters from the previous games, as well as the newcomers Jada, Lilith, Queen Bee, and Bulletta, who was also known as Baby Bonnyhood in the West. The Saturn was missing the hidden fighter Marionette from other versions, but otherwise this is a massive cast to choose from. Much of the gameplay from here includes the dashes, recoveries, and ground attacks you'd expect of a Capcom fighter 3 generations in the making. A versus mode gives you easy access to match and stage options, and there is even an English option you can open up should your skills be sufficient. Let's make no bones about it, Vampire Savior is one of the nicest looking two-dimensional games on the Saturn. Every backdrop pops with beautiful color and an art design befitting a world that houses these creatures. The character sprites themselves are large with impeccable amounts of detail. The strength of that detail lies in how different each one of these fighters look. Because we are using inspiration from various folklore and literature sources, the cast couldn't be more varied. You can have a vampire fighting a demon, a ghost fighting a zombie, a mummy fighting a merman. The variance of art in the fighters and the stages is truly something to behold, and made this stand out at a time when Street Fighter itself had admittedly grown a bit samey. The eclectic nature of it all was a major point of interest for me, and I still consider it one of Capcom's greatest creations of that era. Once you add in the 4MB RAM card support, this all elevates further with what is close to arcade perfect animations. I don't need to count frames to tell you side by side this conversion holds its own against the CPS2 original, right down to the smallest jab, all the way up to the most drawn out super combo. Its lush visual presentation was one of the reasons owning a Saturn was such a treat for me during that generation. No other console would have ever been capable of this port at this level. The PlayStation version, which I played a while later as Darkstalkers 3, was a passable conversion at best, easily crushed by the brilliance you see here. Even the Dreamcast take on the material known as Vampire Chronicles doesn't best the Saturn port in any meaningful way. Many will talk up the likes of Street Fighter 03, but for me, this was every bit as epic visually. Much like the visuals, Vampire Savior's sound and music was again excellent. The soundtrack is varied with a number of different styles in its lineup. Some are dark and ominous, while others are light and playful. Here are a few examples for your pleasure. One thing I always loved about this was it doesn't take itself seriously. While some elements are certainly rooted in more mature themes, the playfulness of the animations and the world itself are a big part of its charm. This is a wild and unpredictable world, and it revels in that fact. The ability to pick it up and instantly understand its mechanics are another big draw. Street Fighter vets will feel most at home here, but even if you prefer other fighting games from other software makers, I believe the fundamentals couldn't be any easier to understand. The diverse fighting styles is another bonus. The elegance of Dimitri versus the brute force of Sasquatch couldn't be more different, a design choice that is echoed across virtually the entire cast. Switching up a fighter here typically means changing the entire way you play it. Add in that killer sound and visual presentation, and you have a fighting package that stands out among the competition. For those of you wondering if there is anything to complain about here, some of the more dedicated to the genre may not appreciate the lack of balance in the fighters. Because there is such a variance in the playstyles, there are massive gaps in who is great and who aren't so great. While the single player hides much of this discrepancy, moving over to the versus mode shines a very harsh light on it. Playing this with friends that have any real skill can really impact your enjoyment if one of your fighters are in the lower tiers. The good news is that the middle ground is fairly well rounded. A solid enough portion of the cast matches up well and makes for some very fun encounters. The matches get so unpredictable, it's almost worth rotating your choices just to see the outcome. That's really the appeal here, the sheer fun of seeing these titans battle it out in not-so-Mortal Kombat. The balance isn't always perfect or even pleasant, but the fun factor is sky high nonetheless. Upon its release, Vampire Savior received some very positive press. Most magazines loved it, and it was one of those games that often made an appearance at import shops and game stores that carried Japanese software. In the years following its release, it kinda got lost in the shuffle of all the Capcom goodness for the Saturn. With the Versus and Alpha series garnering the lion's share of attention, it played second fiddle in the pantheon of fighting royalty. I always wanted to sing the game's praises because of this. I want the world to know just how great this is on the Saturn, if not in general, no matter the version you play. For those of you curious about the English option setting, you need to defeat the game without using any continues. Failing that, there is a hacked image out there you can score that already has the English option on by default. There are also a few modern ways to play this should you be interested, chief among them the Capcom Fighting Collection, which includes the variants Vampire Hunter 2 and Vampire Savior 2 in the bundle. Regardless of the newer ways to play this, I still love and often play the Saturn edition. It looks, sounds, and plays so well, I consider it one of the standouts for the genre. If you have a 4MB RAM expansion, or you need an excuse to get one, this is as good as reason as any. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.